Pleasure to be with you all on this during this exciting week as we're preparing to host arguably the biggest game in LAFC history, and certainly all focused towards that. I'm obviously here to answer any questions you guys may have. It's amazing for us to see the amount of attention, both locally and globally, that this game is deservedly generating. So let's dive in. Anything you guys want to discuss?
John, you've been at the doorstep so many times before. What made the difference this season to push you through to the MLS?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think much has been made of the format that we have in playoffs. I think the fact that this is what people are saying, but I would agree, the two best teams facing off in the final, that's a rarity, speaks to the system that we have in the playoffs. And so I think what we did slightly differently this year, I think we did add more MLS experience. I think contrary to years past, we looked at why we felt like we had come up a bit short despite having an incredibly talented group of players. In some of the years had a really good run throughout the regular season, but didn't end with the second trophy of the season in MLS Cup. And I think what we did effectively this year was we added a robustness to the group where we know now with each coming year the challenges and the travails of a long MLS season. And so what we wanted to do is make sure that we equip the coaches with a group of players that we felt could be pressure tested and come through the other side victorious.
John, and follow up to that adding MLS experience, I want to talk about three guys that you brought in specifically, Ilie, Acosta, and Ryan, and what that has meant to the team, not just on the field, but also in terms of its locker room culture, the things that they add in that way.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. I think for us that's a continuation of my previous response, which is when I said we added a robustness to the group as well as experience. And I think what guys like those three, I think you can add Max, I think you can add some of the other additions. What their experience gives you is a reliability, and that's not to say we didn't have reliable players in the past, but if you contrast a player like Ryan, who's been in this league for so long, knowing what you're going to get is a really powerful thing for a coach to call on, especially in big games. And I think you mentioned three. I think we have 15 of those guys now. And you mentioned something that I think is really important to highlight, which is off the field. And I think you mentioned three, but we've got multiple other examples of guys who really provide an example of what it is to represent LAFC. We always talk about in our scouting department, it's man first, player second. And I think those are great examples of guys who know what it takes to win. They lend their experience to the younger guys. Every single day, one of those guys will do something that a coach can point to say, this is what it takes to win. This is how you should carry yourself. And as a club who has young players, senior players, and finding that right balance, those qualities are really important, not just to the group that we have, but to our supporters, to our academy kids to look up to as examples of what it means to be an LAFC player.
John, hi. I wanted to ask you about what you guys did roster construction, because it's been insinuated and people ask during the whole season, how do you guys did what you guys did exactly, right? So passing that, as a GM, as a decision maker on this league, now with MLS going bigger with Apple, is there something that you want to see getting looser on the rules or more space for the teams in roster construction wise? Like, you guys did a masterclass this year, but do you want to see something specifically to change or improve in that sense?
Thank you for your kind words. Yeah, I think it's not for me to make the rules, it's for me to work within them.
Right.
What I would say is I think we're already seeing that. I think, I often get the question of your DP construction, the makeup of your DPs has differed slightly from what it was in 2018. And the reason for that is now, because of the added initiative of an under-22 player, I can have Sifu and Diego Palacios, and they're not DP. So I think we are starting to see that from the league, and I think the challenge the league has is, the age-old balance of parity versus an ambitious club and loosening rules and what have you. So I think they're taking steps towards that end. I think my job is not to get too caught up in, well, certainly I'm on a committee that helps inform the league as to what we think would be beneficial for the on-field product. However, my job is not to focus on that, but rather within these rules, how best can I construct a roster with the benefit of and help of my staff? How can we best construct a roster, which I think we hopefully Saturday we're celebrating as champions. We've done it to a level that was good enough to win a supporter shield. But for us, we focus more about what we can do within them and save those conversations for the league office.
If I may follow up, talking about that balance, talking about your rival Philadelphia, historically they haven't spent more than $11 million buying players. Mm-hmm. There's people that say, hey, we don't want that. We want teams to spend to have more, mm-hmm. but they're in the MLS Cup final, mm-hmm. right? So what do you want to see in the league as a GM? Is that bad that a team doesn't spend but they're on MLS Cup? So what's
no.
there?
What I think Philadelphia illustrates, and if I may be so bold as to say that we do as well, I think it's about strategic discipline. And so Philadelphia, they spend in areas that other clubs don't as well with their academy, and that's been their focus. So what I like about Saturday and what I like about Philadelphia, what I like about LAFC, is we have very clearly defined models as to who we want to be, and everything that we therefore do then serves that end. And I think Philadelphia, despite being a very different model, they've been very successful in their discipline, in their approach. And I think we, despite having a different model, we share that in common. And so for me, that speaks of flexibility. They can do things to serve their model, and we can do things to serve ours. And I think what you see that's so intriguing about this matchup on Saturday is that you have two very different cities, two very different models, two teams, I say, that they win the East, we win the West, clashing in this final, I think is a really intriguing matchup.
John, how would you describe just your emotions personally when you look back what this journey has been and seeing this club being mm-hmm. born and building it from the ground up and now about to play the first MLS Cup?
Yeah, not just play it, but host it. I think that's what our supporters deserve and what this team deserves. So my emotions are one of excitement. I think, those that have been around from day zero know how much has been poured into this club, and then add those that have been more recent additions on the field and across, our business operation, our sporting operation, and all that's poured into this from our owners to be here ahead of a moment where we're hopefully celebrating another trophy in our short history with an MLS Cup is just one of incredible excitement. And I think, I don't want this to sound overly paternal, but it's one of pride. I think we set out as a club, we didn't shy away from our ambitions and saying we wanted to win supporter shields, we wanted to win Western Conferences, we wanted to win MLS Cup, we want to win Champions League. We don't shy away from that. And so to be one step away from that, I think, is affirmation that we're on the right path. I think we have shown that with our supporter shield this year and in 19, and establishing this club within a short history as a club that's going to compete every year. It's one of pride, and then certainly ahead of Saturday, one of real, genuine excitement for what we hope will be an amazing celebration for our team, our staff, our supporters, and our city.
A second question, when it comes to Gareth Bale, and of course lots of spotlight always on him and that signing, it's been difficult with injuries, but as of today, what has that balance in terms of what his signing has meant been for you?
Yeah, I think the spotlight you mentioned is deserved in the sense that he has been a top player in the world, and the conversations in the summer were really beneficial to help prepare us to put Gareth in as good a position as possible to help at LAFC. And unfortunately, there have been some hiccups physically, and we went into the situation eyes wide open. We knew the risks that we were taking. Gareth did as well. What I will give Gareth utmost credit for is he is a professional. He comes in every day to work, to do his best to get back, to help LAFC in our quest to win a title. The other thing that I think people do not see is the benefit that guys like him and Giorgio and Carlos offer our group. We had talked about some of the MLS veterans, but in a different way, guys that have won Champions League. So now if you have a young kid in our locker room playing in their first final, to be able to go and ask Gareth what it was like to go play in multiple Champions League finals, things like that that add benefit that is not necessarily obvious outside of our building here, certainly we have benefited from.
Take 2 more questions.
John, you made an instant impact upon arrival in the U.S. sports scene. When you win the MLS Cup, how will this
Love that.
the image of this club around the country, the city, and world?
Well, people remember champions, and we, again, when I say we were not shy, we talked about being MLS champions from the get-go before we'd hired a coach, before we signed a player, and that ambition remains. I think thanks to the amazing work of our staff and our players, we're in a position to get one of the trophies that we have not yet achieved. I think take nothing away from our celebration of the Western Conference and the Supporters Shield, which we've now done multiple times. I think this is just another one that will affirm the journey, the process, all of the blood, sweat, and tears that have gone in to make LAFC what it is now.
Sean, you've been around MLS a long time. You've followed the league really since its inception. If we look at this team, the talent that you have at every position on the field, the depth that you have at every line, several people have said they could field 2 teams, they both be in the playoffs. If we're not looking at accomplishments at all, we're just looking at the makeup of the team and what is possible given that makeup. Might this be the best team that's been constructed in MLS?
Oof. I think it is arguably the deepest team. Best, I think it's hard to say. As I say, I think people remember champions. I think it's hard. I'll just speak from personal experience to compare this team to the 2019 team. It's hard to determine best. I think this team is deeper than that team.
More balanced.
I think it's arguably more balanced, but that was a phenomenal team, and I think this is a phenomenal team. And so I think arguably deepest. I'll leave the conversation as to best, hopefully till out on Saturday afternoon.
Last question, Josh.
John, it's one thing to win your conference, but then to do it by playing the best game you've played all season, which is what Steve said. What do you take from that? The players performed at their highest level on the biggest stage.
Yeah, I think much was made, Josh, of what I would call the stumble that we had late in the summer that did not catch us off guard. Did we want that to happen? No. But what I said internally and my own thought process to that is that I would like to think that coming through this period as we did, you now have a team that's been pressure tested, that therefore that game against the Galaxy, that game against Austin was not the first time this team felt pressure. There was pressure to win the Supporters Shield. There was pressure to get back to winning ways. And I think having come through that and sort of being refined by that fire, I think put us in a better position and enabled us to have that performance in the biggest game of the year, to have our players step all the way up the way they did, I think was due to the benefit of that period, was almost like that desirable difficulty of those few weeks where we were not flying on all cylinders. So I think for us, that bodes really well now for a final, that we have guys who played against, the second best team in our conference. Guys aren't naive to the talk. They'd beaten us twice and all that. I think they know that, but they were just so singularly focused on the task at hand. And yeah, it was a 90-minute, incredibly complete performance. And I think I also want to give credit to Steve and the coaching staff and the rest of our staff here that put our players in a position to be successful.